I am Phil Cornish, and I'm your host for Cornish Talks Common Sense. In this program, we're trying to give a perspective of information that is based in truth, something that unfortunately we don't get very often in today's news media, who portray false narratives of events that are unfolding and happening in our world. And so I've talked to you in programming so far about some of these issues that have occurred, and the aim of this program is to encourage you to have a worldview that is oriented in truth and in fact, and not in made up fictions and social constructs that are being portrayed by many false narrators in our world today. So I want to move on and talk about another subject, keeping in mind again the three foundational principles that I've talked about at the beginning of our series of programs, and that is the underlying three ideas that postmodernism has come to be the dominant worldview today. Where does postmodernism come from? I've told you how that Jacques Derrida was probably the key inventor of the idea that there is no longer to be any objective truth. Historical values of what's right and wrong, what's true or false, are now being discarded, because Jacques Derrida would tell you that every person is their own truth. Every person has their own subjective value system, and what's right for you is right for you, and you ought not to be told otherwise. The idea that there is no truth that can be discerned, everybody can make up their own truth, is what is the foundation of postmodernism, and what founds many of the worldviews and the kinds of thinking that are happening in our world today. The second idea is the idea of the elevation of feelings. So I've suggested that today people govern their conduct and behavior most by what they feel, how they feel about something. Emotions run rampant. And we see this in the case of abortion, transgenderism, any issues that you hear about in the media today that are shaped by people portraying a emotional perspective. That has come to dominate in our world today. How you feel is what's important. And of course that can change by the moment, it can change by the day. And that's why it's an unstable viewpoint, a viewpoint that should give us reason to be cautious. In an earlier program, I talked about a well-known writer, Alexander Pope, from a couple centuries ago, who wrote a book called An Essay on Man, where he talked about mankind as this peculiar creature that is forever battling between our emotions, our passions, and our thinking processes. And that's humanity. God has an explanation for that in the Bible that says mankind was created but fell through sin. And so now mankind is condemned to a thinking that is a battle between the spirit and the flesh, you might hear it expressed that way, or between our feelings, our emotions, our passions, and our rational thinking ability. And the Bible has an explanation for that, for why it exists that way. But unfortunately, in our world today, the idea of passions and feelings really has come to dominate issues. And so we see people behaving with riots and crime and other outrageous behaviors that involves activities that historically would never have been supported, tearing down statues. Even our originating Prime Minister of Canada, John A. Macdonald, his statues have been torn down. Edgerton Ryerson, and others. People are governed by emotions that drive them to these kind of activities. Burning down churches. with issues over Indigenous matters in recent times. The media has been quiet about how over 20 churches in Canada have been burned over issues to do with the location of what are believed to be the babies of Indigenous children at residential schools. We'll come back and maybe talk about the residential schools issue in a future program, but I'll just say this much. People need to be careful about jumping to conclusions when we do not know all of the facts. And so being governed by feelings, burning down churches, toppling statues, rioting, these are the kinds of things that historically are not countenanced, and certainly for the health and welfare of our civilization have historically been viewed as inappropriate, misconduct. And yet these are the kind of behaviors that we're seeing over and over again today in our society. And so unfortunately, we see this even by our government. And so our government of federally of Prime Minister Trudeau, who would describe himself as a woke Prime Minister, has taken us into dangerous territory. We saw that with the issue of the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa, and how Justin Trudeau said that these are people with unacceptable views as Canadians. Well, Mr. Trudeau, I have a different version for you. People simply want to have freedom and not to be shackled by the strictures that are promoted by the federal government and by Justin Trudeau that tells us what is acceptable behavior or not based on woke and critical race theories. And so, frankly, we need to understand that our Prime Minister is leading Canadians into dangerous territory with the kinds of policies that he has adopted. What we need to understand is that Justin Trudeau is a man who does not have sound credibility. Our Prime Minister is a person who has been involved in numerous scandals with the Aga Khan, with SNC Lavalin, with the We Charity, numerous scandals. His blackface scandal that he wore years ago at an event. Canadians should not be subjected to the kind of personal philosophy that has been espoused by Justin Trudeau. It has led to dangers that have created huge issues for our country. Look at the Freedom Convoy that happened in Ottawa in February. So Justin Trudeau invoked for the first time ever the Emergencies Act, and interestingly, an act similar to that enacted previously by his father, Pierre Trudeau, as Prime Minister under the War Measures Act. And this similar piece of legislation that Justin Trudeau invoked created new infringements of Canadians' rights, seizing bank accounts, making arrests based on false pretenses that has left us insecure in our rights and values that as Canadians we should be able to hold. The Freedom Convoy, by and large, was a well-intentioned group of populist people who simply wanted to have freedoms that historically we have enjoyed. What they did has been described in horrible terms by the Prime Minister by using false characterizations that have undermined historical and traditional values. The Freedom convoy was described in terms that included racism, homophobia, and other language that simply was just simply misplaced. The alleged illegality initially really would be characterized properly as parking violations, violations that by and large did not even reach the level of criminal code conduct. And yet they were treated as largely criminals, and invoking the Emergencies Act and police involvement that really, I think, stretched beyond what was appropriate. So we need to learn from lessons like this, from behavior of governments led by Justin Trudeau, government agencies led by Justin Trudeau, that threaten our rights and freedoms going forward. We need to recognize that the kind of theories that are being propagated by Mr. Trudeau are based on these social constructs of wokeism, anti-colonialism, white supremacy, that have largely been founded by another philosopher I haven't mentioned yet, Michel Foucault, who was a French philosopher who established the idea that all of the struggles of history can be viewed and should be viewed through the lens of oppressor and oppressed. So everyone is either being oppressed or they are the oppressor. And if you think about it, you see that how that has shaped the thinking of virtually all the battles that are happening in our society today. Feminism, transgenderism, the LGBTQ community, all of these issues have been formulated through the lens of either oppressor or oppressed. And so it's fashionable now to take the side of the perceived marginalized group, despite the fact that they now have become some of the strongest forces of lobbying in the world today. They clearly have the ear of people like Justin Trudeau, who now would say that our historically developed Western civilization is needing to apologize for perceived misbehavior, and in fact to throw down the whole history of our civilization. This is leading to division. This is leading to the fracturing of our society. And in fact, Justin Trudeau is responsible for leading us into an abyss that is going to cause further and further fracturing of our society as he portrays the idea of our historic roots, the British Empire as being flawed and wrong, the idea that all colonialism that literally developed the world, all the institutions of our world, now we should apologize for, perhaps pay reparations in ways that don't follow sound legal principles. I don't want to get too far into the legal weeds on this, but the idea of in personam rights versus in rem rights is a Latin concept that says, look, you can't simply just correct historical wrongs by making a whole class of people today pay for some kind of perceived wrongs of the past history. Legal rights are different than that. They're brought by individuals, and we have class actions today, but made up of individuals who can prove and establish personal wrongs. Well, we can't establish personal wrongs for things done in the 18th century or the 19th century that are now being asked to pay reparations and correct wrongs when those individuals are all long deceased. They have no personal legal rights to advance. So instead, we're embarking on this completely novel idea of current generations being paid for wrongs perceived to be done to their past generations that historically have never properly been founded in law and are indeed not properly legally compensable. So this is the morass of legal distress and legal confusion that is being brought about by some of our leaders today, among them Justin Trudeau, and they need to be called out for that. Thank you for paying attention to what is a difficult subject. Let's end our program there, and hopefully we'll be back with more.